be getting a bit of a real world perspective from Sam Welsh of Forest Carbon, along with giving a little bit of market update later on, and then just a bit of a signpost to some other resources that may be useful as you look to develop your projects. Pardon me. A little bit of background, really. So both of the codes, the Woodland Code and the peatland code, are operating in the UK. The Woodland Carbon Code is managed by Scottish Forestry, or they just work across the whole of the UK, and it sets out the requirements and standards for voluntary woodland creation projects in the UK which tackle climate change by removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. It's been around since 2011, so a number of our earlier projects are coming up to around 15 years old at the moment, and so we'll touch on what that means a little bit later, but we have some older projects. The peatland code similarly works across the UK and is managed by IUCN UK peatland programme. It's a little younger than the Woodland Carbon Code and it's been around since 2015, so its projects are at a slightly early stage in their lives, so less verified units coming off at this stage. The peatland code itself covers restoration projects and or rewetting of peatland in the UK. Both of the codes are designed to offer a way of projects generating income to help support their early cost of works and establishment, but also to provide buyers and those in the corporate sector with an opportunity to offset their unavoidable UK emissions. Both codes are currently looking at international endorsement and accreditation through ICVCM, which is the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market. The peatland code has already applied and the Woodland Code will be doing so a little later this year. They're also both looking again at ICROA, which is the International Carbon Reduction and Offset Alliance. The Woodland Code has had this previously, but has a process of needing to refresh that, I think, every year or two. Both of the codes have a similar structure in terms of how they operate and what kind of units they provide. They both provide essentially ex-ante and ex-post credits. Ex-ante credits being pending issuance units, which are essentially a forecast of future carbon sequestration over the life of the project, be that 40, 50, 60, 70 or 80 years. And they are forecast of future emissions. They aren't guaranteed to turn into verified units for offsetting purposes, as they will be subject to verifications over the life of the project, the first being at year 5, then 15, 25, 35, and at 10-year intervals thereafter. And not all codes have such things as ex-ante units and pending issuance units, but they have been included in both of these to try and provide a mechanism to enable buyers to plan ahead for their future emissions, but also to enable buyers to support woodland and peatland projects right from the outset, and to enable the sellers and landowners of those to generate some income early on. Both codes then throughout the life generate the verified carbon units, the woodland carbon units and peatland carbon units, and each one of those represents a ton less of CO2 in the atmosphere. In the case of woodland carbon units, it's a ton that has been removed, and in the case of peatland code units, it's a ton that has been avoided to be emitted, so one less ton emitted from degraded peatland. Given the age of both of the codes, they're still relatively young in the life of their projects, and at the moment there's less than 1,000 woodland verified carbon units currently available and no peatland carbon units available yet, although as we are coming up to a number of year 15s verifications of the Woodland Carbon Code, we do expect to see more verified units coming into the market and being more available shortly. In terms of who you can sell to as a landowner or developer or seller of the units, there's a number of types of buyers. The first and most obvious of these is the companies that are looking to offset their unavoidable UK emissions. Those organisations will typically have a corporate end user account on the UK Land Carbon Registry, and they will be buying units directly to offset emissions from their other business activities. It's also possible to sell to traders and brokers who are required to be registered and authorised by the Financial Conduct Authority, and traders and brokers will not be involved in developing projects, but will simply buy credits from projects and then sell on, most likely to corporate end users. We also have retail aggregators who offer a much more limited form of training, and they buy and retire units on behalf of corporate end users, typically who won't have their own account. It's not possible for individuals as individual people to hold units and to have an account on the UK Land Carbon Registry, but the option does exist for sellers to hold units on their behalf and then retire them as and when they're ready to be retired over the later verifications. There has been a scheme over the last 3 or 4 years operated in England called the Woodland Carbon Guarantee, and that's been operated by the government and the Forestry Commission. The last auction on that was in the autumn last year, and it's currently closed. but there is a web link there that we can provide for future information as further auctions may occur in the next year or two. The codes generally are there to provide, I guess, a high level of integrity as to the credits that are being generated under the codes, that they are robust, that they are well calculated, and that the validations and the certifications of the sequestration of carbon happen over their lifetimes. But there are a number of initiatives out there in the market that also enable buyers to demonstrate that they are buy units and offsetting for the right reasons. The largest of these is the Voluntary Carbon Market Integrity Initiative, which is the VCMI, and they have a link to a closed code of practice whereby buyers can, I think, get accredited against a gold, silver, or bronze standard to show how much work they've done to first reduce and eliminate emissions before they get to reducing emissions. It is consideration certainly for some sellers, but it isn't a consideration necessarily for all. It's worth noting also that a number of projects particularly have a much more local focus around the seller-buyer relationship, and a number of those who sought from the outset to form a very local relationship with interested local corporate partners, and they've tended to be involved at very early stages. So it isn't necessarily a case that you would be looking to sell after having developed your project initially. There's a number of other considerations, and I'm sure Sam will touch more on these with a real-world experience a little bit later on. But a few things I suppose to think about is that you're not obliged to sell all of your units. You can obviously retain some of those. A number of sellers we understand are keeping some of those, sometimes for their own use and for their own offsetting of their own future emissions. Some are doing so to manage risk in delivering units under a contract to buyers in the event that projects underperform or don't go as well as they planned, and so they have spare units to provide to buyers. But also some are also offering to retain units for later sales should prices rise in the future. It is also possible to sell to multiple buyers for the one project. I suppose a specific point to note is that if you are selling pending issuance units, do be mindful that these have serial numbers and they are linked to the specific vintages in which they're due to mature. So whether that's year 15, 25 or 35. So you should consider how units, if you're selling to different buyers and or retaining some, how they relate to one another in the event of change. I think it's fair to say probably the vintage and serialized number issue is probably worth its own webinar and explanation in some time to come. I think there's some very particular parts of that one needs to be aware of. In terms of finding a buyer, the codes in the UK land carbon registry provide a number of tools to help you find a buyer and also to help buyers find sellers. The Land Carbon Registry itself has a public database which lists all of its projects and is searchable by name, location, project type. And there's also opportunity on the private version of the registry for sellers to list units for sale through the request for information platform. Buyers then with an account on the registry can then identify those units and then contact the seller themselves. It's important to note that whilst the registry manages the listing and transfer of units, it doesn't manage pricing, and it certainly doesn't manage the transactions around those and the contracts around those. So it doesn't set pricing or terms of the sale. That is a third-party transaction between yourselves to work out. In addition to that, the Woodland Carbon Code website also seeks to help by providing maps of projects, whether they have pending issuance units or verified carbon units. These are searchable Google Maps at the moment. I think we're looking at different formats, but we have a number of maps there. And we also list the project developers with available PIUs, WCUs that are available to be bought, as well as listing the retail aggregators who are selling units. Both of the websites also provide links to the project developers and the aggregators on their sites. Hopefully Sam is on the line now or shortly, and we'll be able to pick up with some sellers' perspectives. Looking at Susan at this point. I may have gone a little quick there.
Yeah, I think Sam hasn't managed to get on the call yet, so I wonder if we could maybe hand over to Vicky to speak a little bit about carbon pricing.
Thanks, Susan. So I'll just give you a little bit more information on carbon pricing, and then hopefully Sam will appear and can give us his perspective from selling units. So as a little bit of background, we've been working with Ecosystem Marketplace over the last couple of years to collate carbon prices from all the sales that have happened in the UK market. So that includes the Woodland Carbon Code and the Peatland Code. Ecosystem Marketplace have this global carbon markets hub where they collate information across the globe about carbon prices. They're an NGO, a trusted NGO, and they produce the kind of global state of the voluntary carbon market reports as well. But they're doing this bespoke report for the UK market. It's very easy to report with them through their hub. The data is all anonymous, so nobody can identify any individual sale or individual or company from the results. And hopefully the production of these carbon prices generates more confidence in the market for you as sellers, as well as kind of insights for buyers in terms of what the expectation is for the price in the UK. So if you look on the chart there to the right, that shows you that last year, the last year we've reported so far, which is 2023, the average price of woodland carbon units was £23.30. And the price has gone up fairly steadily over the last 4 years. That's the green bars, although the volume of transactions that have been reported to us has fallen slightly over that time period, although the price has steadily increased. And I guess one thing to note about the prices is that there is a big spread of prices. So whilst the average price is £23, the spread, as in the difference between the lower and upper price, is £37.50. So there's wide variation, and there's a number of reasons for that variation. It could be the type of project, it could be the location, it could be the type of contract, it could be the vintage of the PIUs. There's a whole number of issues, and Sam might go into some of those when he's on later. But what we do know is the average is 23, and there's this variation around it for various reasons. And what we're trying to do is collect more information and more prices so that we can start splitting this data and give more insights into why the price varies. So the one thing that we were able to split out in 2023 was the difference by species. So projects which were broadleafed, so that's at least 80% broadleafed, on average generated a price of £29, whereas those which were mixed mainly conifer had an average price of just over £20. So we're starting to be able to split out those differences with more data. And as more people report, we'll be able to split more differences so that we can understand the data better. So I guess this is, as well as telling you a bit more about the data, this is also a plea to ask any of you who are making sales to report your data. Now's the time to do so for 2024. We're just working with Ecosystem Marketplace again, and they'll be getting in touch with project developers to encourage them to report through the Global Carbon Markets Hub. If you already have an account, it's easy to add more data to your account. If you don't have an account, it's pretty easy to set one up with them. Doesn't cost you anything and shouldn't take too long. And the Ecosystem Marketplace guys will help you make sure you can navigate the system and input your data. So we'd be looking for data for both woodlands and peatland sales. And hopefully you can kind of contribute to this picture so we can have a better understanding of carbon prices as the market matures. One of the benefits of being a reportee to Ecosystem Marketplace is that they have this hub, and because they do global carbon pricing, they have this whole wealth of data. So whilst it remains anonymous, you can, within the hub, as somebody who reports, you get access to this data to be able to play with it and cut it in different ways and look at different things. So for example, this is just one view that you can see from their hub where they look at different project types across all global reporting and sort of how the price varies for these different types of project and then different subtypes of project within each group. So you can see in the middle there's a sort of forestry sector, but then that's divided into loads of different subsectors, and you can see the different prices for each subsector. and you can look at prices across regions across the world and things. So it gives you, there's a lot of information you can kind of look at in an easy to view format if you want to understand how carbon prices work across different types of project, across different regional areas. So if you are making sales, please do report via the hub. The web address is at the bottom of the slide just there. And as I said, Ecosystem Marketplace will be in touch with the project developers soon to encourage you to report any sales you made in 2024. And this is just by way of a bit of understanding as to how many sales have happened in the past. So this graph shows over time the number of units that we've issued and when they're going to be delivered or converted into verified woodland carbon units over time. So the actual numbers on the graph are a bit small, but from left to right is years, and it's approximately the next 100 years in terms of when the units are going to be delivered. And up the left-hand axis is the number of units that have been issued, with the total being over 10 million units. And you can see the ones in blue are the ones that have been sold, and the ones in green are the ones that are still available for sale. So you can see that around a third of units over the entire lifetime of the 100 years have been sold. And there's about 2/3 of them available for sale. And if you look closely at the years towards the left, it's fair that a higher proportion of the units in these earlier vintages have been sold. The black line on the graph shows the rate of conversion. So when PIUs are going to be, how many PIUs are going to be converted to WCUs. So that's, as you can see, in the next few years, that's pretty slow, but it soon ramps up so that there's hundreds of thousands of units being converted every year, rather than hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands at the moment. I think that's all I was going to say just now. No, in fact, before I hand over to Sam, I'll just go through this slide, and then we can go to questions after Sam's done his bit. I saw you're here now, I think, Sam. So there was just a couple of other resources we wanted to point out. So this webinar will be available to watch on demand once we've kind of processed it and put it online. Already on our website, there's a webinar about buying carbon units. So any potential buyers, you could point them to this as a source of information. Gives you a sort of introduction to the market from a buyer's perspective. Jonathan's done a lot of work in the last year on creating template agreements. So this is an agreement between somebody selling and somebody buying carbon for either PIUs or for verified woodland carbon units. So we did a lot of work with the 3 legal teams listed there. And we've come up with these template agreements, which with lots of options, but it sets out makes clear the kind of potential liabilities of both parties and the risks that you're entering into with the contract, and provides suggestions in terms of how you might want to put your contract together. So we've just been consulting on that, and those contracts will be available on both the Woodland Carbon Code and Peatland Code websites before the end of March. And they'll be available for you to use when you're considering making a sale. And hopefully that gives you much better insight and easier start in terms of kind of putting that contract together and knowing what you need to consider in your sale. I think that's all from me. I'm going to hand back over to Sam now, if you are here. So Sam Welsh is from Forest Carbon, one of the project developers working with both the Woodland Carbon Code and the Peatland Code. Sam, are you there? I'm sure I saw you join.
I am, yeah. Thank you, Vicky. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Great. I'm tuning in from a hotel lobby, so hopefully there's not too much background noise. But yeah, thank you for having me. I mean, as Vicky's just said, we are a project developer primarily, but we also act as a kind of retailer of credits on behalf of the projects we've taken or supported through the validation process. or otherwise where there's potentially projects that have taken themselves through that or used another partner, then we can act as in more of a kind of broker fashion, so giving them a route to market. We've been one of the most active in both those roles since the inception of both the UK Woodland Carbon Code and peatland codes. So our role as a retailer, and my role within the kind of remit of the company, is we are sourcing funding for projects via organizations, and that can be public or private, SMEs up to large multinationals who will reach out to take action from a kind of voluntary standpoint. So they can find us anywhere. It can be events, social channels, carbon marketplaces, via word of mouth, or quite commonly, it can be through the codes themselves, such as the Woodland Carbon Code's kind of buyers page. And typically they're seeking to support projects as they are developing a form of ESG CSR program. So that can be from a kind of carbon or sustainability standpoint, i.e. meeting neutrality, net zero. It can be part of a tender or responding to part of a tender. It might otherwise be potentially from more of a kind of tree planting position. So it can be, we find companies almost adding that as a kind of premium to their goods and services. Or what we're finding more so at the moment is it might be taken from a kind of philanthropic contributory position, but with those latter two, they're using projects that have been taken through the accreditation standards to provide that assurance of higher quality, higher integrity, and confidence in where their money is effectively supporting. So regardless of which of those routes they go down, our role as at Forest Carbon is trying to help them navigate or taking that buyer through what is still quite a kind of niche, complex market, and with changing landscapes around best practice and legislation in both sustainability and the codes and the project methodologies themselves. So therefore, when we are selling a project, I would say I primarily focus on educating the buyers, so what they can and can't do, what PIUs versus verified units enable them to claim, how or whether the delivery timeframes that Vicky just showed, how they may typically support or kind of be modeled into future strategies with kind of very kind of slow growing trees, for example, delivering non-linear cumulative delivery of carbon. And the second part of that conversation is typically what I say is kind of the art of matchmaking specific buyers and sellers. So finding the right fit. So what I mean by that is understanding what their preferences are, what their volume requirements are, whether they have preferential locations, project types that could be focused on native broadleaf versus conifer. They might want to go down routes where there's more of a biodiversity element or flood mitigation, water quality element in terms of co-benefits, as opposed to, say, sustainable timber elements. And that can be potentially sectorial based on why they make them decisions. Or it might be that actually projects or businesses buying into projects want to vet who they're working with, so we can support that project, that process as well. I guess importantly, whichever route they go down in terms of contracting, we find overarching the conversation typically falls within highlighting the risks on both sides of the table. So risk, while it sounds kind of boring, it really does take up a large percent of our time within these conversations that we're having. So it's finding a position in terms of delivery risk, durability of projects, permanence, or otherwise kind of levels, frequency or quality of reporting, or including kind of price, that when we are back to back in contracts between projects and buyers, that both sides of the parties are happy with. So it's really understanding what the other side wants and what the other side can provide. And I guess that has landed us as an organization on where we currently price projects within the market. So we, I think, sit quite close to that average mark that Vicky outlined, but it's a position that we think will continue to drive liquidity and growth in the PIU market specifically, which is what we have focused on today through the kind of pre-sale mechanism of credits. That landscape has changed in recent years. I think, again, you saw changes in kind of price post 2019. There was an upsurge in pricing, then it's kind of somewhat remained steady, or if not dropped it in parts. But that is in part because of market dynamics. So obviously increased demand and increased prices, but it is also kind of a drive. I guess what we're seeing prices is hedging upon what the future of integrity and quality looks like in a project. So getting an understanding of what the future of the market looks like. Are you laying on greater accuracy in reporting procedures? Is it the introduction of new tech, which may again have both inflationary, or it might help efficiency of costs? You're also looking at kind of layering on further quantification, so inclusion of biodiversity or other nature-based metrics, as well as factoring in community inclusion standards, all which may have impact on cost. But it's effectively kind of balancing that against what the demand side, or what companies are willing to pay in a voluntary market and what they can potentially afford. So we are helping projects try to mitigate the risk, and also on the other side, the buyers themselves. So on the project side, that may include contracts where actually providing advice to say hold some credits. So it might in effect be saying sell 75% of the first 50 years, within suggesting potentially you hold remaining credits either for insurance against delivery risk, or in the case of where it might be farmers for use against your own emissions, for example. I guess ultimately the position you take as a project, I would say, is very much, or a land manager looking to implement a project, is what is your current financial situation? Are you changing or diversifying land use in order to seek immediate capital? In which case, someone like Forest Carbon or other retail aggregators in the market can help you find a buyer through the sale of PIUs. Or do you sit on credits and hedge against, say, speculative increases in the market? So, or do you find that middle ground, i.e. selling a percentage and holding a percentage? It might be actually that you're as well looking at selling whole projects versus kind of part projects or piecemeal shares of projects over time, which again will fluctuate the time frame in which you might be able to access finance. So we would say if you are selling a project as a whole project, that may take a longer period than selling piecemeal of, say, X volume of credits over the years. I guess what else comes down the line is, are they going to be, as mentioned, kind of changing MRB procedures? Is there going to be inflationary cost to that? It might there be wider ecosystem benefits that you can monetize? What I imagine we'll see, and probably are already seeing, is a bit of a kind of differential in the products in the market. So understanding where your product sits, what you're going to apply to that. Is it going to be co-benefits? Is it going to be focused on permanence, etc., etc.? And I guess that is why we've seen a bit of a kind of range in the pricing of credits, and this was with the kind of international market. So I think what's going to be crucial going forward to help all parties, and I know that Vicky is advocating this, is obviously greater transparency in what is actually being kind of priced and contracted, because often price alone doesn't paint the whole picture. It doesn't reflect maybe whether there is an earlier vintage strip being sold of, say, pre-2050 credits for net zero strategies, and how that balances against post-2050 risk for landowners. It might actually be down to the kind of quality of the projects. It might be looking at the certain risks within those contract ranges. So every landowner buyer might work within a standardized contract, but within the optionality range might kind of vary between what they are willing to take on themselves in terms of liability. So understanding all that and having that transparency in the market will hopefully drive further growth and confidence, I would hope. I'll leave it as that, Vicky. I'll pass it back to the team. But yeah, thank you again for having me. And if anyone wants to get in touch, more than happy to have a call.
That's great. Thanks very much, Sam. I'm not sure if Sam can stay on to answer questions, because I think he might have a prior commitment to get back to. But we do have Garance here from the Peatland Code, who is also able to help with our question and answer session today. So we've had quite a few that have come in the chat already. And if you've got any other questions, do pop them in there and we'll get to them. So we'll start with the first question that's come in. Vicky, I think you might have answered it already, but just to confirm, in terms of units, what does 1 carbon credit represent?
So yeah, I've just confirmed in the chat, but all our units are 1 tonne of carbon dioxide equivalent removed from the atmosphere.
Great, thank you. And moving on to the next one, why do you think the average price of broadleaf carbon units is higher than those for conifers?
Again, it might, when we do more analysis of the data, when we have more carbon prices, we'll be able to say a bit more, but I'm guessing, and Sam may have been able to say more, but maybe some of the differences that those broadleaf projects maybe provide a wider range of other co-benefits, whether that's from biodiversity or flood mitigation or the way that communities are involved. But I think it's probably to do with the wider benefits that come with those projects. That has to be said, having spoken to a few buyers, there are some buyers that prefer broadleaf native woodlands over productive conifer woodlands, and that's just the perception, or they ask that they come with. So.
Okay, thank you. We have a question about the UK emissions trading scheme. The last year's suggestion to include carbon removals in the UK emissions trading scheme, are both peatland and woodland units under consideration for this?
I don't mind jumping in.
Yeah, go
Susan. I think we've seen in the chat there's a very helpful bit of explanation on the context from Freddie, but just to make everyone aware, at the moment we're kind of consulting on that and kind of speaking on the ETS. Peatlands are not currently being considered, but we're kind of discussing how peatlands could in the future, but at the moment, peatlands are not. I don't know, Vicky, you want to kind of fill in on your side from a woodlands perspective, what's being considered?
Yeah, again, there's not really much to add just yet, but obviously government did consult on the emissions trading scheme and whether or not to include some nature-based credits in the ETS. So the Woodland Carbon Code credits are under consideration, but there's no formal response yet from government on the direction of that. So we're waiting to I'm sure many of you are, to hear the outcome of that consultation.
Great, thank you. Next question here from Doug. Woodland Carbon Code data seems to indicate the number of Woodland Carbon Code units has declined year on year from 2020 to 2023. He says that's surprising and asks why we think this may be. Yeah,
so when I was showing the carbon prices, the price of units realised has gone up from £10 to £23, to over £23 in those 4 years. But the volume of trades reported to us has decreased. I guess if you think about this in the context of the wider carbon market, in the voluntary carbon market globally, there was a bit of a peak in 2021, and in fact the decrease in the UK is less than the decrease that's happened globally. So I guess there has been, you'll be aware in the press, there's been quite a lot of talk of need for integrity in the market, and I guess then there has been some uncertainty from buyers as a result of some of those stories. I think that's right. It's really important that mechanisms like ICROA and ICVCM are working to kind of set the bar for integrity globally, and then standards like ourselves and the Peatland Code and Vera and Gold Standard are making sure that they meet those high integrity standards to provide that trust and confidence in the market, so that buyers will be willing to engage more.
Great, thank you. And there's a second part to Doug's question as well. Has any analysis been done of costs compared to revenue generation from selling carbon unit prices for Woodland Carbon Code and the Peatland Code?
I'm not sure of anything we've published recently. There was something we published a few years ago looking at the costs and revenues. I don't know if we've done anything to look at the rate of increase in the carbon price versus the rate of increase in the costs to see whether overall your net benefit or deficit kind of over those years. Certainly when you look at if you look at the rate of increase in the carbon price and compare it to inflation, the carbon price is increasing well above inflation. So that certainly kind of indicates that the price is healthy in that sense.
Great, thank you. Now moving on to tax. Do you know how the sale of PIUs and PCUs is treated for tax purposes? Liability for income tax, or are they liable for income tax or capital gains?
I guess neither Garance or I are tax advisors. I've put a link in the chat. So on our website, we have a link to all the HMRC guidance on VAT, on inheritance tax and income capital gains tax. So I probably don't want to say too much today and end up saying the wrong thing. One thing that has definitely changed is that when you sell voluntary credits now, they are recognised as an asset that is VATable. So you should bear that in mind. And I would encourage you to go look at those links and that HMRC guidance to check you're doing the right thing in terms of the other forms of tax.
Yeah, I'd echo that. And as with standards, we don't really get involved in the sale of the carbon credits. So it's best, like Vicky says, to speak to advisors and get the most current information, really.
Thank you. Do you have any experience of restored peatlands, which is then sold, that has PIUs which are due to validate as PCUs over time, perhaps as part of a 50-year contract? And do you know how this impacts on land value?
Well, we haven't really had much experience of this, so not that I know of, and we're also not privy to kind of any information on what a land sale value might be, so we can't really comment on how that might impact the land value. I guess it's very dependent on the kind of the contract that's in place with the landowner and what kind of information is on that. I'd imagine if the PIUs haven't been sold, that could be kind of a positive, and potentially if there are sold PIUs, then that might then impact it. But yeah, unfortunately, we can't really comment on that.
Okay, and next question, does restored peatland in itself qualify for inheritance tax relief as an agricultural holding? And similarly, how are PIUs, PCUs held in an estate treated?
Again, unfortunately, I would probably say to get some advice from any kind of accountant or tax advice, and maybe speak to HMRC around that, because unfortunately not aware of how the PIUs are treated in a kind of an estate and what tax relief you might get.
Great, thank you. Maybe another topic for a joint webinar with HMRC at some point there. Okay, moving on. Does the carbon produced by UK credit schemes contribute to the national inventory and to the UK NDCs? So
I guess I can answer. Shall I answer first, Garance, if you have anything else to add afterwards? So the UK greenhouse gas inventory, or our NDC, I guess, is the sum total of all the woodland creation in the UK. So that includes the woodland creation under the Woodland Carbon Code and that which is not under the Woodland Carbon Code. So if you add the two together, you get what the total of woodland creation that's in the NDC.
Yeah, and peatland code projects can contribute to the UK greenhouse gas inventory. So yeah, they do contribute.
Great, thank you. And NDC, could you just remind me what the acronym stands for?
So that's our, if I get it right, nationally determined contribution. So that's our contribution under the Paris Agreement in terms of the emissions from the UK as a whole.
Great, thank you. Okay, moving on. Is there any data available on sales of carbon credits outside of the peatland code, Woodland Carbon Code? I've heard anecdotal tales of global corporates buying carbon cheap in schemes which may be less robustly structured in terms of methodology and verification. it'd be useful to have some data to understand this better.
I guess that's also a useful plug to go back to Ecosystem Marketplace, because they collect data globally from all the, I guess, what you would call the reputable carbon standards globally, those that are applying to ICVCM. But then you can understand that pricing difference across the globe and across different types of project. So again, if you report, you get extra data, but also if you look on the Ecosystem Marketplace website, you can look at their State of the Voluntary Carbon Market report, and then that shows you how the price varies across sectors, across countries, and you can get a wider understanding of the global picture. Those, if there's any, I guess, less reputable sales going on that aren't through one of the recognized standards, then it's unlikely that data on the prices achieved is going to be formally collected somewhere. So it's probably harder to say the prices achieved through any other schemes that aren't so recognized.
Perfect, thank you. And I think the final question we've got on the chat today so far is, do you have an opinion on the respective merits of buying credits from the open market as required versus longer term arrangements, for example, offtake agreements?
Sure. I suppose from our side,
Do you want to go down?
Yeah, sure. In respect to the buyer side, I guess it's an issue as to whether one is able to forecast ahead the activities that you'll be doing as your core business to understand what your offsetting requirements might be. And in many cases, some buyers are choosing to try and plan ahead for that and enter into either option agreements or offtakes or forms of that. And as Vicky referred to, we have a couple of template contracts that we'll be publishing next month to help some of those discussions. But really, that's a case of them sort of seeking to manage their risk of their supply and the price of that supply over time. I think we do see a range of indices out there that show the price of verified units over time rising quite significantly, and that's sort of 10, 20, 30 years. So it's one way in which some buyers are seeking to manage that price risk of how they do in the market. Likewise, for sellers on that part, if they're entering into contracts early, then again, they are securing some buyers. But I think as Sam inferred as well, some sellers are looking to hedge their bets and maybe try and retain some. So it really depends, I think, in many cases as to your intent as to why you're buying. Are you buying because you know you'll need to offset, and do you want to try and fix that price? Or again, as Sam also said, a number of buyers are in there for ESG and other reasons to try to really get a great involvement in the projects. We do see a lot of people wishing to invest early in projects and really engage with the sellers from the outset. So there's a real mix of motivations, I think, amongst buyers out there, and it will really depend on what is driving your desire to buy, or likewise the sellers, your desire to sell, and what risks either party is willing to bear. In that, as Vicky said, the draft contracts will hopefully provide a bit of a starting point for discussing that risk and that allocation of risk between the two parties, and there'll be templates coming out shortly.
Great, thank you. In your experience, what is the minimum viable project size for Woodland Carbon Code and peatland code projects, taking into account costs of monitoring, reporting, economies of scale, etc.?
I'm not sure if I have a fixed number there. I guess one thing I'd point out is that for small projects in the Woodland Carbon Code, and at the moment we class small as 5 hectares and below, there is a streamlined process for the validation and verification processes. Certainly at verification, there's a lot less monitoring required, or a different type of monitoring required, which makes things simpler. We also have the option of self-assessment every other verification, which will effectively halve the verification cost over the time of the project, provided that there's no concerns about the project. And from talking to other project developers, I think there's various thresholds depending on the type of project you're doing. There's various thresholds, kind of somewhere between 5 and 15 hectares, I think, at the moment, I've heard people say to me, in terms of what they think would be viable. Garance, I don't know if you have any other thoughts from the peatland code side. Your projects tend to be bigger, so I don't know if it's less of an issue for you where the threshold is.
I think off the top of my head, I think we've got some projects that are around 100 hectares. We might have something as small as 50, but I don't think anything smaller than that. And also it really just depends on the costs. So providing it's not too inaccessible, and it's kind of not too much of a cost to get there, and you don't end up having to use kind of helicopters to deliver any other kind of restoration materials, then that might reduce your costs. But yeah, I don't think we have anything smaller than 50.
Thank you. We've got one final question, which is maybe quite a nice one to end on, as it's quite forward-looking. If you were prepared to do some future gazing, how do you see things playing out in the coming years?
I don't mind doing a little answer to that. I guess it really depends how many of the kind of main standards apply to ICVCM, the core carbon principles, and what that label will then do to the kind of costs and price, and whether that will then help really generate that confidence in the market, and then kind of be that benchmark. So that's something that I know we're quite interested in seeing, and I'm sure Ecosystem Marketplace are also quite interested in for this 2025 report. I don't know, Vicky, if you've got anything else you want to add.
I think, like you say, Garance, if we can enable that trust in the market, then I guess from our side, we're doing as much as we can to kind of enable the market to work. We're also looking at how we can make things more efficient through looking at our monitoring through the CivTech project, and make the whole process more cost effective. I guess we certainly aren't in control of global economics and some global forces. But I'm optimistic that confidence will return to the market, and things will be on the up again.
I suppose just to add to that, I suppose we are seeing, coming from more of a construction project development background rather than the carbon background, we are seeing across the UK, whilst this is a voluntary carbon market, you are seeing in many smaller sectors, whether that's planning and development and other things, more compliance markets coming in, and therefore the need for offsets being created from a buyer's perspective, and from those end users, whether that's house builders or others. So that demand beyond an ESG or CSR stuff is starting to build over time. It's not quite there as a compliance or compulsory requirement yet, but it is starting to grow sort of sector by sector. So that should help demand and therefore help price over time.
Great, thanks all. I've just shared a poll in the chat there. I think we're coming to the end of our time now. So yes, any feedback on today's session would be much appreciated. So thanks everyone for all your fantastic questions. It's been a really engaging discussion. And thanks to all of our presenters today, Jonathan, Garance, Vicky and Sam. Before I finish up, I'd just like to highlight our next webinar, which will take place on Thursday, the 13th of March. That's on the topic of mapping your Woodland Carbon Code for validation and verification. You can see details about that on the Woodland Carbon Code website, and also in our newsletter, and also a bit of a plug here on our shiny new LinkedIn account. So please do follow us to find out more information there. All that's left for me to do is to thank you all again for attending today, and thank our excellent speakers, and we hope to see you all again soon. Thanks everyone. Bye-bye.